The name Lucifer does not enter the Bible as a demon's name. That sentence is disorienting, not because it is designed to shock, but because it exposes the crack at the center of the story. The distance between what the word first meant and what it later became is where the whole investigation begins. Open the page to Isaiah 14. In the Latin Bible, the translation that shaped Western Christianity for more than 1,000 years, one word appears there: Lucifer. And when many later readers saw that word, they did not see a neutral image. They saw the devil, they saw the fall, they saw the enemy of God before the later imagery of hell had even entered the scene. But in Latin, Lucifer is not first a monster's name. It is a description: the light bearer, the morning star, the bright object at the edge of dawn, visible for a moment before the sun rises, brilliant, elevated, and then gone when the greater light appears. That is the first image. Not horns, not a throne in hell, not a dragon, a star. Before there is a monster, imagine a figure of brightness standing in silence, not yet the devil of paintings, not yet the dragon of Revelation, not yet the ruler of hell in popular imagination. Only a luminous name standing before a question: when did light become accusation? And this is why the question is more difficult than it sounds. If Lucifer begins as a word of light, when did that light become rebellion? When did a description become a name? When did a poetic image of height and collapse begin to look like the biography of Satan? The Bible does not answer that in one clean scene. There is no chapter titled "The Origin of Satan." There is no single verse where a heavenly servant is introduced as Lucifer, rebels against God, and walks out of heaven as the devil of later imagination. Instead, the evidence comes in fragments. Isaiah gives the first wound in the name: a star brought down from height. Other texts will add pressure later: beauty, pride, accusation, lightning, war in heaven. But none of them arrives labeled as the complete biography of Lucifer. The pieces have to be read, compared, and held together carefully. And once they are held together, the name begins to change weight. It enters the page as brightness. In later Christian imagination, it begins to carry rebellion. So this video is not asking whether the horned devil of later imagination was once called Lucifer. It is asking something sharper. How did a word associated with light become one of the most powerful names later attached to the enemy of God? Not through a conspiracy, not through a secret chapter removed from the Bible, but through a slow convergence of texts, translations, visions, and traditions, each one adding pressure to the same name. And that convergence created something powerful. It gave the Christian imagination a figure of cosmic rebellion. But it also created a problem. The more complete the later portrait became, the easier it was to forget where the word began. Before Lucifer was remembered as darkness, the word stood on the edge of morning. Before the monster appeared, there was a name, and the name was light. Before Lucifer became a name, it was something you could see in the sky, not a face, not a throne, not an enemy, a light at the edge of morning. To understand what happened to the name, we have to go back beneath the later theology, the paintings, and the sermons that turned Lucifer into a proper noun with a biography attached. We have to return to the Hebrew phrase underneath the Latin word. Underneath the later Latin word stands the Hebrew phrase often transliterated as Helel ben Shachar, shining one, son of dawn. The phrase does not first behave like a personal name in the modern sense. It behaves like an image, a figure drawn from the sky before sunrise, the bright morning star, often associated with Venus, appearing for a brief moment before daylight overtakes it. That image matters. The morning star shines before the sun, but it does not own the morning. It appears brilliant only because the greater light has not yet filled the sky. And when the sun rises, the morning star does not win a battle. It disappears. That is the force of the image. Brightness, height, visibility, then loss. Isaiah reaches for that kind of picture, a brilliance that cannot hold its position when the greater light arrives. Not yet a full supernatural biography, not yet a scene of heavenly war, not yet the devil of later Christian imagination. A light that falls from its place. In the Latin tradition, and famously in Jerome's Vulgate, That Hebrew image was rendered with the word Lucifer. The translation made sense. In Latin usage, Lucifer could mean the light bearer, the morning star, the bright herald of dawn. Roman writers could use the word without meaning Satan at all. It carried beauty, elevation, and temporariness before it carried demonic weight. But the placement of the word changed its future. Lucifer was not placed in a neutral sentence about sunrise. It was placed in a sacred text, inside a passage about a ruler brought down from impossible height, a figure who says, "I will ascend," a figure who reaches upward and is cast downward. So the word was doing its original work. It described brightness that could not remain above the true light. But it did not stay contained. Once Lucifer appeared inside a biblical sentence about pride, height, and collapse, later readers could begin to see more than a fallen king. They could see a pattern, a form, a spiritual warning. A light that became dangerous not because it shone, but because it reached beyond its place. The word was still light, but now it stood inside a fall. And from that placement, the later portrait could begin, because Isaiah was not only speaking about light, he was speaking about ambition. Isaiah 14 is not on its surface a text about the devil. That has to be said before the passage can be heard clearly. The later portrait of Lucifer is so familiar that it can stand in front of Isaiah like stained glass, powerful, dramatic, and capable of changing the light that passes through it. So step back into the text. Isaiah is speaking into a historical wound. The taunt is directed at the king of Babylon, the imperial figure associated with conquest, exile, and impossible pride. It is a funeral song for a tyrant who believed his power was permanent. Political poetry sharpened against an empire that had raised itself over nations and assumed it could not be brought down. And inside that taunt, Isaiah reaches for the image. How you have fallen from heaven, shining one, son of dawn. The language is excessive, because the arrogance being mocked is excessive. The king had inflated himself beyond what any human ruler could sustain. So Isaiah gives him an image equal to the inflation. A figure who says, "I will ascend." A figure who wants his throne above the stars of God. A figure who imagines himself rising above the clouds, becoming like the Most High. The language of height is total, and then the language of fall is equally total. Yet you will be brought down to Sheol, to the depths of the pit, from the stars to the grave, from the highest claim to the lowest place. That is the arc Isaiah draws. Not because the passage by itself gives a full account of a supernatural rebellion in heaven, but because it shows what arrogance looks like when it borrows the language of heaven. A human ruler becomes so intoxicated with elevation that ordinary political power is no longer enough. He begins to speak as if the throne of God were within reach. That is why the text carried so much force for later readers. Its immediate target is a fallen ruler, but its shape is larger than the ruler. A figure of brightness reaches beyond its place. A voice says, "I will ascend." A throne is imagined above the stars. Then the entire movement reverses, and the one who reached upward is thrown downward. The passage does not give the complete biography of Satan, but it does give a pattern later readers could recognize: pride reaching toward divine height and collapsing under the weight of its own claim. Isaiah gave the later portrait its first movement. He did not finish the portrait, but he gave it its essential direction: upward, then down. And once that movement existed, another passage could be placed beside it, one that did not speak of a morning star, but of beauty, corruption, and a figure expelled from the mountain of God. If Isaiah gave the investigation a falling star, Ezekiel 28 gives it something even more unsettling: a figure marked by beauty, proximity, and expulsion. Ezekiel 28 does not mention the morning star. It does not use the word Lucifer. It does not describe a figure falling from heaven in the same arc Isaiah drew. And yet for centuries readers have placed it beside Isaiah 14 as if both passages belong to the same emerging portrait. The reason is not the vocabulary, it is the shape. Like Isaiah, Ezekiel is addressing a historical ruler, this time the king of Tyre, the prince of a city enriched by trade, splendor, and self-confidence. The accusation is direct. His heart had become proud because of beauty, and his wisdom had been corrupted by splendor. But what Ezekiel adds to Isaiah is something new. Isaiah gave the movement, height, then fall. Ezekiel gives the interior corruption that makes the fall intelligible. Not merely political arrogance, not merely power over other nations, something closer to the center, a being receiving beauty, wisdom, and radiance as gifts, and turning those gifts into self-exaltation. And then the lament stretches beyond ordinary royal language. The passage speaks of an anointed guardian cherub. It places the figure on the holy mountain of God. It surrounds him with precious stones. It evokes Eden, the garden of God. It describes fullness of wisdom and perfection of beauty. The register has changed. The lament still addresses a ruler, but its imagery begins to exceed the profile of an ordinary human king. The language becomes elevated, symbolic, and strangely cosmic, close enough to history to accuse a ruler, but expansive enough that later readers could hear more than politics in it. And the fall that follows is proportionally severe. The figure is cast out, removed from the mountain of God, driven from sacred proximity, expelled from the place where beauty had once stood near holiness. That is why later readers placed Ezekiel beside Isaiah. Isaiah had already given them the movement, ascent, and collapse. Ezekiel gave them the figure, beauty, wisdom, privilege, corruption, expulsion. Neither passage alone gives the full portrait, but once they stand beside each other, they begin to form a face. Now the tradition has two images in hand, the falling star and the exalted cherub. And the next question is no longer whether the Bible contains images that later readers could associate with celestial fall. The next question is how those images were joined to the figure already known elsewhere by another role, the adversary, the accuser, Satan. Before the investigation moves forward, we need a moment of clarity. Two fragments are now on the table. Isaiah gives the falling star brightness, height, ambition, collapse. Ezekiel gives the exalted cherub beauty, wisdom, privilege, corruption, expulsion. Both passages address historical rulers. Both passages use language larger than ordinary politics, and neither passage, by itself, gives the complete biography of Lucifer. That is not a footnote. It is the center of the problem. If you read only Isaiah, you get pride brought down from impossible height. If you read only Ezekiel, you get beauty corrupted and sacred proximity lost, but you do not yet get a unified figure with a name, a prehistory, and a role in the larger story of evil. That required another piece, not another image of height, not another jewel-covered figure near the mountain of God. A role. Someone already moving through the biblical text under a different function. Not the morning star. Not the cherub in the lament. An adversary. A serpent in the garden. An accuser in a heavenly court. A presence that does not merely fall, but opposes. Isaiah and Ezekiel gave later readers the images of fall. But the figure the tradition would identify with those images was already known elsewhere by another name, Satan. And before Satan could be fused with Lucifer, he had to be understood as something different. Not first the fallen star, but the adversary who accuses. The word Satan in Hebrew is not first a proper name, it is a function. Before it became a name, it described a position. Someone standing across the path, opposing, obstructing, accusing. A Satan is an adversary, a challenger, a prosecuting voice. Someone whose role is to bring a case, test a claim, and stand against what is being asserted. That function appears in the book of Job in one of the most unusual scenes in all of Scripture. The heavenly court is assembled, God is present. And among the figures who present themselves before the throne, there is one described as the Satan, the accuser. He is not introduced as Lucifer. He is not introduced as a fallen star. He is not introduced as the ruler of hell. He arrives as someone who has been moving through the earth, observing, and who now brings a challenge. Has Job's faithfulness actually been tested? Remove the protection, and what remains? The scene is unsettling precisely because the accuser is not standing outside the court. He is inside it. He is not yet the dragon of Revelation. He is not yet the complete cosmic enemy of later Christian imagination. He is something stranger and in some ways more disturbing. A prosecuting voice operating within the heavenly assembly, performing a function the scene itself appears to accommodate. The accuser asks, God responds. The test is permitted. Whatever the text is doing theologically, the portrait it draws is not the portrait of a horned ruler beneath the world. It is the portrait of accusation near the throne, adversarial, sharp, and present where the later imagination might expect only worship. Genesis adds another pressure point. The serpent in the garden does not arrive with wings, a throne, or the language of falling stars. It arrives with a question. Did God really say? The challenge is not military. It is interpretive. The adversary works not through force, but through the introduction of doubt into a space where the command had been clear. Trust is destabilized before open rebellion appears. Revelation will later identify the ancient serpent with the devil and Satan. Later, Christian interpretation would begin placing that Satan beside the fallen star and the exalted cherub. But in the texts themselves, the pieces arrive separately. The morning star falls in Isaiah. The cherub is expelled in Ezekiel. The accuser presents his case in Job. The serpent introduces the question in Genesis. They do not yet share a name. They do not yet share a face. What they share is a pattern, opposition to the order God establishes, whether through pride, corruption, accusation, or the quiet destabilization of trust. Many later Christian readers looked at that pattern and began to ask whether it had always belonged to one figure. And the New Testament would press that question further, because there the adversary will no longer appear only as a serpent in the garden or a voice in the court. He will be seen falling from heaven. The New Testament does not open a chapter on the origin of Satan, but it does something almost as significant. It places a falling image in the mouth of Jesus. In Luke 10, the disciples return from their mission with reports of power. Demons had submitted to them in the name of Jesus, and in response, Jesus says the sentence that changes the pressure on the entire investigation. I watched Satan fall like lightning from heaven. The sentence is brief, but the image is violent. Lightning does not descend slowly. It cuts the sky open. It appears suddenly, brilliantly, and then vanishes almost as soon as it is seen. That is the image Jesus gives to Satan's fall, not a slow decline, but a sudden descent from height. And because the words come from Jesus, the line carries enormous interpretive weight. Was he describing a past event, a primordial fall before human history? Was he describing what was happening in that moment, as the disciples' mission pushed back demonic power? Was the language visionary, prophetic, symbolic, or historical? The text does not resolve that cleanly, but it does something decisive for later readers. It connects the figure called Satan with the image of falling from heaven. Isaiah had a falling star. Ezekiel had an expelled cherub. Job had an accuser. Genesis had a serpent. Luke has Jesus watching Satan fall like lightning. The fragments begin to move toward each other. Then Revelation presses the image into cosmic scale. In Revelation 12, war breaks out in heaven. Michael and his angels fight against the dragon. The dragon and his angels are defeated, and the dragon is thrown down to the earth. Then the text names him, the ancient serpent, the devil, Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. Now the investigation has changed. This is no longer only a poetic image of political collapse. It is no longer only a lament over corrupted beauty. Revelation gives the fall a cosmic and eschatological frame. War in heaven, expulsion, angels cast down, and the ancient serpent identified with Satan. The pieces are not identical. They do not all describe the same scene in the same way, but they now begin to exert pressure on one another. A star falls. A cherub is expelled. An accuser stands in the court. A serpent deceives in the garden. Jesus sees Satan fall like lightning. Revelation sees the dragon thrown down with his angels. No single passage has yet given the complete portrait of Lucifer as Satan, but later, Christian readers now had enough overlapping images to begin reading them as one story. Still, one more stream of tradition would make that fusion even easier to imagine. Because outside the central biblical canon, ancient Jewish tradition had already preserved stories of heavenly beings who crossed their boundaries rebelled, and fell. Not Lucifer yet, but angels. And once the fall of heavenly beings entered the tradition, the name Lucifer had a world ready to receive it. Before the name Lucifer was attached to a single cosmic rebel, ancient Jewish tradition had already been asking a related question, not about a morning star, not about a cherub near the throne, but about angels. What happens when a heavenly being crosses the boundary it was given? The Book of Enoch, preserved most completely in the Ethiopian tradition, known in early Jewish and Christian circles, and echoed in the New Testament letter of Jude, gives one of the oldest extended answers to that question: the Watchers. These are heavenly beings with a position, a function, a place within the order of creation, and they abandon it. In the language of 1 Enoch, they see what they desire below the boundary assigned to them. They descend. They act outside their designated role, and the consequences are severe, not only for humanity, but for the Watchers themselves, who are described as bound, confined, and awaiting judgment. One of the central features of their sin is boundary crossing. They had been given a place near the divine order. They left it. They crossed downward into a domain that was not theirs. And in crossing that boundary, they did not become more than they were. They became less. That pattern matters for the investigation, because Enoch does not identify the Watchers with Lucifer directly. It does not tell us that the morning star of Isaiah is one of the Watchers. It does not turn Ezekiel's cherub into their leader, but it does make the fall of heavenly beings thinkable in a specific way. It gives the later imagination a framework, beings created with dignity and function, placed near the divine order, who corrupt what they have been given and fall as a consequence. That framework was available to early Christian readers. When they looked at Isaiah's falling star, Ezekiel's expelled cherub, Satan falling like lightning in Luke, and the dragon cast down in Revelation, they were not reading in a cultural vacuum. They were reading in a world where stories of heavenly beings crossing boundaries and falling under judgment were already known. Enoch did not give them Lucifer, but he gave them a world in which a figure like Lucifer could make sense, a world where the fall of something created and luminous was not merely an abstract idea. It was a story pattern, a boundary crossed, a place abandoned, a descent followed by judgment. And once that pattern was available, the fragments from Isaiah, Ezekiel, Luke, and Revelation could be placed closer together, until later readers could begin arranging them into one portrait. The portrait did not arrive complete, it was assembled, and the assembly happened gradually across centuries of reading, translation, preaching, and theological reflection. Early Christian interpreters inherited fragments. A figure of brightness reaches above its place and falls, Isaiah. A being of beauty and proximity is corrupted and expelled, Ezekiel. An adversary accuses in the heavenly court, Job. A serpent destabilizes trust in the garden, Genesis. Jesus watches Satan fall like lightning, Luke. A dragon is cast from heaven and identified as the ancient serpent, the devil, Satan, Revelation. Each passage had its own context, each image had its own target, each text could be read on its own terms. But when later readers placed them beside one another, the pressure points became difficult to ignore. Height, beauty, pride, accusation, deception, expulsion, descent. The connection was not arbitrary, but neither was it delivered as a single finished chapter. It was a reading formed by convergence. Tertullian could read Isaiah's fall as the fall of the devil. Origen would press questions about rational beings, freedom, pride, and descent. Jerome's Latin Bible placed the word Lucifer inside a passage already gathering satanic interpretation. Augustine would develop the fall of angels as part of the wider story behind human rebellion. Across these readings, the word grew heavier. Lucifer stopped behaving only like a description of the morning star. It began behaving like a name, and that change did not happen all at once. A word does not become a theological identity in a single sermon. It gains weight by repetition. It is copied into manuscripts, heard in churches, explained by teachers, painted into imagination, and repeated until the description begins to feel like a person. That is how the name changed its function. At first, Lucifer pointed to brightness. Then it pointed to a fall. Then it pointed to pride. Then, when read beside Satan, the accuser, and the dragon, it began to point to rebellion itself. That is the interpretive fusion. The falling star, the expelled cherub, the accusing voice, the serpent, the lightning, and the dragon were increasingly drawn together into what looked like a single biography, a single arc, a single answer to the question the tradition had been circling. What kind of being could stand so close to God and still choose opposition? The answer was not ordinary darkness, it was corrupted light, a creature defined not by the absence of glory, but by the misuse of received glory. And the name that came to carry that entire weight, brightness, height, pride, fall, accusation, expulsion, was the word the Latin tradition had placed on the page. So now the question the title asked can be answered. Not with a single verse, not with a hidden chapter recovered from a lost manuscript, but with something the investigation has been building toward since the first fragment appeared. If Lucifer served God, as the later portrait imagines him doing, what changed? The answer formed by the tradition is precise. Not the light itself, the relationship to the light. A created being that reflects glory does not own the glory it reflects. The morning star is brilliant before sunrise, precisely because it stands in the right position, close enough to the coming light to catch it, not so elevated that it can mistake itself for the source. The moment the star imagines it owns the morning, it has already misread what it is. That is the movement Isaiah described. That is the interior corruption Ezekiel named. That is what the accuser in Job performs at the level of function, a being that takes its access to the divine court and turns it into a prosecuting posture against the creature God has chosen to test. That is what the serpent enacts in the garden. Not a frontal assault, but the quiet suggestion that the command of God is not what it appears to be. The sin the tradition gathered under the name Lucifer is not the sin of weakness. It is the sin of created light treating itself as the source of light, not darkness pretending to be brightness, brightness refusing to remain received. That is why the later portrait has such theological force, even where it is historically composite. The tradition did not simply invent a monster, it assembled a pattern, and the pattern describes something real about pride at its most extreme. Not ignorance of God, not distance from God, but proximity to God turned into rivalry with God. The name entered the page as a description of the morning star. It became the name for the figure who looked at the light it had been given and decided that light should belong to it entirely. That is when Lucifer stopped pointing only to brightness. That is when the name became an accusation, not because the light disappeared, because the light forgot where it came from. The star did not fall because it was bright. It fell because it tried to become the sun. The answer is now visible, but its consequence is sharper than the answer itself. Before the final word, there is one implication worth carrying forward. Not as a sermon, but as a consequence of everything the fragments revealed. The tradition assembled Lucifer from images of brightness, height, beauty, and proximity to God, not from images of ordinariness, from distinction, from closeness, from gift. That is not incidental. It means the warning attached to the name was never primarily about the danger of being far from God. It was about something that can only happen near God, the confusion of received light with owned light, the mistake of treating proximity as possession, the error of confusing the gift with the giver. The cherub in Ezekiel was not corrupted by poverty. He was corrupted by beauty. The morning star in Isaiah did not fall from obscurity. It fell from height. The accuser in Job did not stand outside the court. He stood inside it. The pattern is consistent. The closer the position, the more precise the danger. Not because closeness to God is dangerous in itself, but because closeness creates a question every created thing must answer. Is the glory I carry mine, or is it reflected? Lucifer, as the tradition constructed him, is the figure who answered that question wrongly, and that wrong answer changed the function of the name. At first, Lucifer described brightness, then it described height, then fall, then pride, then opposition. The name changed because the function changed. A word that once pointed to light became a name that pointed to rebellion. A description became an accusation, not because the light disappeared, because the light stopped referring beyond itself. That is the theological consequence of the portrait. In the later portrait, Lucifer becomes Satan not simply because a bright being falls, but because reflected glory turns inward and becomes opposition. The mirror stops reflecting. The gift forgets gratitude. The light remains visible, but it no longer points back to its source. The question the title asked was, if Lucifer served God, why did he become Satan? The answer this investigation found is not hidden in a lost chapter. It is preserved in fragments, scattered across Isaiah, Ezekiel, Job, Genesis, Luke, and Revelation, fragments the tradition learned to read together. And when those fragments are held in the same hand, they do not first describe a monster created for opposition. They describe a figure created for proximity. A figure who confused proximity with ownership, who confused brightness with source, who confused a given position with a throne it could claim. The name entered the text as light. It left the tradition as the name for one of the oldest forms of pride, the kind that begins near God and then turns inward. The star did not fall because it was dark. It fell because it forgot it was reflecting, and that leaves one final fracture for the next investigation. If Lucifer became associated with the corrupted morning star, why does Revelation also use the language of the morning star for Christ? How can the same image point toward rebellion in one tradition and glory in another? That is where the next question begins. Who is the real morning star, Jesus, Lucifer, or Satan?